Blog Talk Radio.
Please check out the Barefoot is Legal radio show right here on Saturdays, 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That is 10:30 a.m. to noon Pacific Time, as we show you all about your barefoot rights and living a barefoot lifestyle. And for more information about the 501c3 nonprofit Barefoot is Legal, please check out barefootislegal.org. Hey everyone, come check out the Proof Negative radio show here on freedomizerradio.com, Monday through Thursday, 9 p.m. to midnight Eastern, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. on the Pacific Coast, as we fight the New World Order and rock the health freedom world together.
From the people that brought you the roller coaster making game and who brought you the FEMA coloring books, it's the FEMA Camp Tycoon. That sounds cool! Here you will have over 800 concentration camps to choose from. Wow! You want Vegas? 29 Palms? Jacksonville? Start with Beech Grove, Indiana, and it's all yours. You'll learn how to get people on the red, the blue, and the yellow list. I want to be red. I want to be blue. Buy more trains. Get HR 645 passed, but don't pay the Senate too much money. You'll need to buy gas chambers with that. Collect barcode readers, sell souvenirs, and hit the high score on collecting millions of American people, I mean, right-wing extremists. Anyway, coming soon, FEMA Camp Tycoon.
We're starting a brand new show on Freedomizer Radio, The Pilgrim Show. I'm your host, Nate Moss, the Guru Pilgrim. It's a show about technology and politics, bringing you all the latest news and information to keep you up to speed and in the know. I'll be offering advice and tips on technology and sharing my own thoughts on a wide variety of topics. Join me on the journey into freedom and philosophy, Saturdays from 4:30 to 6 Eastern Time, 1:30 to 3 Pacific.
Please check out the Barefoot is Legal radio show right here on Saturdays, 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That is 10:30 a.m. to noon Pacific Time, as we show you all about your barefoot rights and living a barefoot lifestyle. And for more information about the 501c3 nonprofit Barefoot is Legal, please check out barefootislegal.org.
Radio listeners, you all know that the reason for global cooling is global warming. Well, we here at Lake Havasu Snow Removal want to remind everyone that we can plow your driveway or street 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We are available in the Lake Havasu, Phoenix, and soon-to-be Tucson areas in the cold Arizona desert. So, if your driveway is backed up in the middle of April or in the frozen tundra season of August, please call 855-NO-AZ-SNOW today. Any time of day, any time of night, Lake Havasu Snow Removal will clear your driveway in freezing cold tundra of Arizona. Thank you.
Welcome to A Billion Realities. Here's your host, Jessica Gerlach.
welcome back to another episode of A Billion Realities. Today we have a dear friend of mine who's in law enforcement, Michael Worden, with us. Hi, Michael, are you there? Hello, hello. Guys, give me 1 sec. I think we're having some technical difficulties. Hold on 1 second. Do we have Michael here now?
I'm here now.
Oh, great. I'm so sorry. We had some technical issues, guys, but Michael Worden, welcome to the show. I'm
Thank
so
you,
sorry
Jessica.
about the wait. I'm sorry
That's
about
okay.
the pause to the audience.
That's
How
okay.
are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. You?
I'm good. Everything is okay, you know. Under quarantine for the most part of the day, I should say. Everything closes down about 3 p.m. here, 5 p.m. curfew. How's it over there?
It's chaotic, but we haven't gotten to that point yet.
That's good.
But I can see it coming.
Can you? So
yeah, I can see it coming.
You can let the audience know where you're at, too.
I'm in New York State, in the city of Port Jervis, so about 90 miles outside of New York City.
My hometown, actually.
Yeah.
That's right. So Michael's with us today to discuss PTSD on the job. So he's got some pretty amazing insight into that. And as we all know, PTSD, you know, is usually related to violent crimes, war, of course. But I think people don't realize how prevalent it is in your line of work. And I'm so excited to kind of dig into your world a little bit, and so people can understand the traumatic things that you guys do see on the job, and how you guys deal with that for the most part. So, how long have you been in law enforcement, and what exactly is your title?
So I've been in law enforcement for over 21 years now. I started in 1998 as a correction officer for the state of New York. I did that for just shy of a year when I was hired to be a police officer, and that was in 1999, went through the academy. I've had a pretty interesting and varied career. I worked as a patrol officer first, was promoted to detective after 6.5 years. That's pretty quick. I did that for almost 9.5 years before I was promoted to sergeant, so I am presently now a patrol sergeant. And I've been doing that since June of 2015 is when I was promoted to sergeant.
Okay, wow. So you've had a lengthy career there. So
yeah.
How well would you say that your training prepares you for emotional trauma or even witnessing violent crimes?
So when I went through the academy in 99, there really wasn't a lot of preparation for the mental health aspect of my profession. It wasn't something that really was talked about. You didn't get any training on it. Now, it's much more common to see police academies, especially the one here in Orange County where I work. The police academy now addresses that and brings officers in to talk to the recruits about things that they may experience and see over their career, to give them that mental preparation a little bit.
Amazing. Okay, so it has evolved. That's good to hear.
Yes.
Do you feel that there's any way to really prepare anybody for the traumatic types of things that they will see on a job like yours?
I don't know that you can prepare them to see it, but what helps is preparing them to know that when you do see it, these are some of the reactions that you can expect to experience, some of the things that you may go through, and that it's okay to go through those things and to recognize the signs and symptoms of exposure to these traumatic and stressful incidents, and to know that it's okay, and probably more important, that it's okay to reach out for help when you think you need that extra help and talk to somebody.
Absolutely. I can just imagine, if you don't know what the signs and symptoms are, you might actually think that you're going crazy, right? Because it's so intense and you relive those emotions of experiencing that type of trauma. So what is the support like after a violent or traumatic event on the job?
So I'll speak from experience. I was involved in a shooting in 2007. Myself and another officer were involved in a deadly force encounter where we had to, use deadly force to stop a threat. And at that time, we were in my agency, the only other shooting that had happened in recent time was like in 1981. So we're talking a long time had gone by. So it was uncharted territory, so to speak. No one really knew what to do, other than we went and saw a state police psychologist for a couple of sessions. And it was great because he told us what a great job we did, which, I never questioned whether we did the right thing, but he never even prepared us for what was or could happen. And unfortunately, we had to find out the hard way how that could negatively affect your life.
So he was a psychologist for that reason, for that purpose, but he still didn't prepare you for what you were about to experience after the traumatic event. That's correct?
Yeah, basically. I mean, we talked a little bit, and, he talked about what we were feeling at that time. Said you guys did a great job, basically don't second guess yourself. Don't blame yourself for the situation. You responded according to your training, all the things that I kind of already felt. But as I was later explained to by another doctor, normal memories are kind of like freshly mowed grass, he said. When you look at a field of mowed grass and you see the nice lines of mow and it's beautiful, he said, that's a nice memory. That's a normal memory. He said a traumatic incident is like taking a backhoe and gouging out that nice grass and leaving big holes. Because that's what traumatic incidents do to your memories. That's how they come up.
Wow, great analogy.
And when he explained it like that, it really made sense because, that's the part I wasn't prepared for. And I went through a really, really rough time in the years after that shooting because I wasn't ready.
So do they leave it up to you to decide if you need the support after the event, or is it a requirement right away, even though you didn't get the full extent of the support that you needed in order to know what was coming? But is that like protocol? As soon as you go through an event like that, you have to see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much standard that, when you go through the event like that, you do have to go see somebody who's departmentally, it's like a mandate basically, because you need to be cleared to come back to work. That doctor needs to say you're fit to return to duty. Because some people may not be fit to return to duty. It may be psychologically scarring instantly, or they can't return to an active service.
That makes sense. But what happens sometimes, and as was with your case, is that it came on kind of like over time. It wasn't immediate, the impact, right, on your
definitely
the trauma. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was definitely a period of months, and then I would say even up to the year after is when things really started to unwind gradually, even to the point where I didn't notice it at first. It took me a while to even catch on that I was not responding according to what I wasn't acting the way I should be.
Right, and I think this is how PTSD sneaks up on people, is that they don't really know what's happening at first until you're heavily immersed in that state of fear, anxiety, or panic. So that brings me to another really great question, I feel, is how common is it for an officer to be left untreated after trauma, especially when it doesn't hit right away?
I would have to speculate on this, but I think it's probably very common. More police officers in the United States die by their own hand than in accidents or by, violence committed upon them. So suicide's the number one killer of police officers.
Wow, that says a lot.
Yeah.
I did not know
absolutely.
that. That says a lot. Okay, so I mean, we all know the types of things you see on a job like that, but if you could give us some insight to some of the worst things that you see, I think that the average person can't even imagine having to see things like that, on a regular basis or even at all, most people, So what are some of the most traumatic things, or you can talk about the most traumatic thing that triggered PTSD in you if you want.
So I'll give you a couple of examples here. So in the months before the deadly force encounter that I was involved in the summer, as a detective, I had to investigate the drowning of a 14-year-old boy, and was in the hospital as they were attempting to save his life, and they couldn't. So of course, you're in the emergency room, his family's there, and it's a horrible scene as a person, let alone as a police officer. And then right after Thanksgiving that same year, right before the shooting was in December, we had a 15-year-old girl hang herself in her closet the day after Thanksgiving. So those are just, two events that happened in right up in the months before the shooting. So I think there's that cumulative effect also of the things you've seen, and the things you've experienced.
Sure.
And that's just not including the normal things you roll up on as a patrolman, the disturbances, the fights. As a detective, I've handled 4 homicides. One of them was a 13-month-old baby smothered by his father.
Wow.
And then recently here in our jurisdiction, I can't go into details because it's an active case, but there was a person left their newly born baby out on a rock naked in a cold November night, and the baby froze to death. And I was there to see that on the scene.
Oh my God. Wow. So, I saw that actually in the news, but wow. So you were on the scene.
And I didn't sleep for a month after that. I had problems sleeping because that's all I saw was that baby's face. Every time I closed my eyes, it was horrible.
I cannot even imagine how I would even ever get over something like that. And then, you guys in law enforcement have to repeatedly see this. So, yeah, I can just imagine how heavy that is on your mind, your emotions. It's all really traumatic stuff. It almost feels to me like people in law enforcement or anybody who does a job that puts them in that emotional trauma constantly, that they should almost have like a full-time, therapist just for post-traumatic stress. I don't know. That's maybe that's unrealistic, but I feel like everybody's human, and so how much can you take? So
right, and it's not just police. I think it's EMS, fire service. They see very similar things. We may encounter them differently, but we see very similar trauma. And, we see things normal people never see in their life, ever. In a million years, most people go their entire life without seeing or experiencing any of these things. And that's good. They shouldn't have to.
Unfortunately, that's true. I mean, not unfortunately for them, but unfortunately for you guys, you have to see so much of it, whereas the general public, like you said, they're never going to see something like that, hopefully, in their lifetime, and they probably won't, most people. So what would you say are the most commonly triggering events for PTSD? I mean, we know the violence, but what are the most common things?
So I know that for a lot of people, especially in law enforcement, it's that it's especially that intense fear of dying, where you think you're going to die or you're about to die. And for me, that's what I think is what really triggered mine, because I really believed that night I was about to die. That was a legitimate, probably the only time in my life I've ever felt that way, where
wow,
I could die any second now. This is, when they talk about how things flash through your mind very quickly. And, I remember thinking, I had 2 little boys at the time at home. They were little. pre-Kers, and it's all I kept thinking. It's amazing how many thoughts can run through your mind in a very short amount of time, without you even being really aware that you're thinking them. They're just kind of happening.
That's unreal.
So I think it's that intense fear of dying, and then also just seeing these horrible events that happen to people. Seeing someone who's been beaten to the point where they're going to die, and being in the hospital where they're lying there, and just seeing what another person is capable of doing to somebody. Those are just.
Wow.
I think that a lot of it's cumulative. It might not necessarily be one event.
Right.
But when you eventually, if you fill the cup with enough water, it starts to overflow, and I think that's how it is for some.
Right. That makes sense to me. It's like one of my questions that I thought about before we talked, was like, would you say you've been able to handle a lot of emotional trauma? And I felt like that's kind of a stupid question in a way, because like you said, it's not that you've been able to handle a lot or some things are, easy. It's a buildup, and it almost becomes like constant threat and negativity and fear. So, I mean, how do you do it day in and day out? How do you handle that type of life, seeing what you see?
So before the shooting, it seemed easier for me to compartmentalize those things. I could be at a traumatic scene and almost not emotionally block it, but I could do my job and sort of really just focus on what I needed to do without becoming too invested in the emotions of it. So if people were there crying, I was still able to sort of put up that wall in front of me, that plexiglass wall I call it, so you can see through it, but it kind of blocked some of that out. After the shooting, that was probably one of the earlier signs that I knew something was wrong, when I couldn't do that. And I'll give you a quick example. It was a death notification. Someone had died, and it was an overdose. And I was at the hospital when the family was showing up. They didn't know. They were just coming to the hospital, and I had to take the guy's family member into a side room and give them the bad news. And this person broke down on my arm crying. And, I got her to sit down, and I had to leave the room because I broke down. I had to leave the room and go into another room because I couldn't keep myself together. And that never happened. Like, to the point where I was, I wasn't able to do what I was supposed to do at that moment because I just couldn't. And that was a definitely early sign, like, hey, something's not right here.
Because that wasn't your typical response to a situation like that. So you're definitely more sensitive than usual to something that you would typically deal with on a day-to-day basis or somewhat. So, okay.
Right.
So how long after the shooting was that you noticed that?
Oh, that was probably 5 to 6 months at the most. It might even be a little less. That was probably one of the first signs I really noticed. But I didn't connect it at the time. Looking back, that's definitely the first sign. But it was later on, as things progressed, that I noticed, as things got worse in my life, that I really realized that I was kind of screwed up at that point.
Wow. So even at the time, you didn't know. So you're literally, you're having symptoms of PTSD, but even at that time, you didn't know. So it must be really difficult to ask for help when you don't even know what's happening right away. So at what point did you realize that...
I'll have to go into a little detail here so you kind of really get the
Please do. Yeah, sure.
Well, I will tell you, probably the first symptom was that, so the shooting was on December 14th, and on Christmas, my kids were little, and my ex-wife, we were divorced, but I was at her house on Christmas morning so I could watch the boys open their gifts, and she got them cap guns, and they would run around pulling the trigger on the cap gun, and I noticed every time they'd pull the trigger on the cap gun, I would jump when the cap would go off, like startle. Now, I grew up playing with cap guns. I never startled.
Right.
And, of course, once the boys who are little notice that Dad jumps when they shoot the cap gun behind his back, it became a game.
Of course, yeah.
But that's one of the signs of PTSD is that the startle response becomes very exaggerated. So pop the balloons, loud noises. But over the course of 2008, I noticed very slowly, and I lived alone most of the time. If I had my kids 3 days a week, I had my kids. But other than that, I didn't have adults in my house other than, who I maybe hung out with or family members talking to. But I would come home from work. I was a detective, come home at 10 o'clock at night, whatever. And I started having this fear that, someone might have broken into my house and they were in my house waiting. So I would start to search my house at night, and I would search every room, every floor, which, okay, I'm sure a lot of cops have done that. But then it becomes to the point where I'm not only searching the obvious places, but I'm looking under, like, the china closet where the cat can fit, not a person.
Oh, wow.
And if the person does fit, they're really little.
Yeah.
So it becomes, but at the time I didn't think, okay, I'm just satisfying this need to look. If I don't look, I won't be able to go to sleep. Then I start to think, okay, maybe someone's, maybe they're not in my house, but what if they break in my house and I can't hear them? So I start rearranging rooms so that I can, put my bedroom in the most secure room of the house downstairs. I nail my windows shut. Now I live in an old house. It's a fire trap with the windows shut, nailed. Like completely irrational thinking. But again, at the time, to me, it was like, I'm just being cautious. I'm a cop. People have threatened my life, before, and I don't want them to get in here.
Like
and then it
hypervigilance.
became where, and then I would start to sleep. I would be worried that, if they get in and I can't see the door, I would start to sleep. I'd sit on the floor, my back against the wall, and fall asleep sitting up on the floor. Just very bizarre behavior. I started having a lot of problems sleeping with the event running through my mind suddenly. It would just pop into my head. So I became irritable. It's one of the signs, right?
It is the racing thoughts about the event. You relive it, but it's more like unwelcome racing thoughts. It's not just like it crosses your mind, and So I don't mean to interrupt. So
no, that's true though.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to think, because there were so many little things that when I really looked back at it, I'm like, wow, I was screwed up. How did I not notice this? But I became irritable, not just startling easy, but very irritable over little things.
Okay.
And then probably one of the worst was I was in my office at the basement of City Hall. It was January of 2009. So I remember this pretty vividly. It was a cold day. I was in my office doing nothing in particular, just probably going over cases, what we would normally do if you had nothing pressing at the moment. And I remember feeling very odd. I described it as like this, this panicky feeling started. And I started feeling I couldn't breathe, and I'm thinking, oh, God, am I having a heart attack? But I'm like, okay, I'm probably not having a heart attack. I don't know what's wrong. And then the longer I sat there trying to, calm myself down, I started to feel hot. I remember loosening my collar and undoing my tie a little bit, and I started to sweat. I started to get headachy. I started to get dizzy, and I remember getting up and leaving my office, walking quickly out of the basement and getting into my unmarked police car and shutting the door. Now it's January. It's cold, and I'm in a full sweat in the police car. Like, it's dripping off of me. I'm at that point realized I was having an anxiety attack. And
so you were aware.
I just dawned on me, I'm having an anxiety attack. This is how what it is. And I just sat there. I breathed through it, and I sort of just sat there until I started to get cold. Because then I realized when I started to get cold, it was over. Because now the sweat was becoming, I'm soaking wet in a cold car.
Oh, my God, yeah.
And I remember going into the police department, going into the bathroom and looking in the mirror, and my shirt is drenched, my hair is wet. I mean, it looked like I just got done running outside in the summer.
Wow.
And that's when I knew, I need help. I need to talk to somebody. This is not going to end well if I don't. This is not normal.
Okay, so how long was the time frame from the event until that moment when you had the anxiety attack?
It was just over a year, probably.
Wow. So
after the shooting.
Okay. You lived with that for a year. So would you say that it progressively got worse and worse? Or was it just like a
absolutely.
fluctuation? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was getting worse because, the little signs and symptoms were building up to bigger things, and because I wasn't addressing them because I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know what I was experiencing at the time was in response to this event, to trauma.
Absolutely. So is there anything in place now? I know you said it got better, but is there any specific program that teaches exactly like those signs and symptoms to look out for and to seek help if you're experiencing those things at this stage?
So it's become much like I could tell you definitely there's much more mental health awareness now taught to police recruits. They go through crisis intervention training, which is how to deal with people who are having a mental illness or a mental crisis, emotional disturbances, so that they can better address. And they also, in those, they talk about officer health, mental health awareness. So, the officer keeping themselves mentally aware. And then every year we do go to the police academy, myself and the other officer involved, and then officers from other agencies talk to the recruits and share their experiences. We tell them very bluntly not only what we went through on the scene, but we also talk about what we experienced in the months and years after and how it affected us and how we addressed that and the importance of asking for help and knowing it's okay. Because that's the hardest part as a cop to do, ask for help.
Right. I would imagine it is because you're like, well, this is what I signed up for, I bet, right? Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And as a man, I feel like our society doesn't make it super easy for men to reach out for help when it comes to emotional issues or mental health, which is totally unfair. But, it's the way it is.
No, it definitely. It's definitely between, as a police officer, it's always we're the ones that people call when they need help. That's how I always looked at it. My wife gets so mad at me to this day. And when we were first dating, she would even notice it's like, she would complain about a problem or something, and I would like offer a solution. She'd be like, "Well, I don't need the solution. I just want to complain about the problem." I'd be like, "I know, but I'm just so used to solving problems at work. Like, I don't even realize I'm doing it."
Oh, wow. That is a common dynamic between men and women, though.
Yes.
Men like to solve.
It's so true. Yes.
It is.
And it's not like it's. I don't even know I'm doing it. She used to also say, when you ask me questions, it sounds like you're interrogating me. I'm like, well, I ask questions for a living. I'm sorry. I don't mean it. So there is a level of, you do something long enough, it almost becomes part of you.
Of course. Second nature.
But it's definitely hard because as a police officer, you think, well, I'm the one with the answers. People call me when they need help. I'm the one who's supposed to come here and be strong and make them feel confident and solve their problem or help them with their problem or help them with their crisis. And I'm a man. Like, I'm supposed to be tough. So the hardest thing for me to do at that time was pick up the phone and tell someone, I needed help to make that phone call. It was the worst, hardest thing to do in the world. I can't even tell you.
Wow. So what was that like? So you had the anxiety attack and you realized, like, I'm in trouble. I need help.
Yes.
So what exactly did you do after that?
So I remember I was at my grandmother's house up in the upstairs bedroom, and she had a phone book, and I'm looking through the phone book, and I picked the first one I saw, and I had to take someone that took workers' comp because workers' compensation would pay for it's a work-related injury, technically. So
Okay.
I remember picking the phone up and being in tears and just, picking the phone up and then hanging it up, picking it up, hanging it up, and finally dialing the number. I got the secretary. She answered. I told her who I was, what my problem was, and she's like, yes, we take workers' comp, and I am going to get you in here ASAP to talk to our psychologist because they had a psychologist and a psychiatrist. She goes, to get you in with the psychologist ASAP, and then we'll get you an appointment with the doctor as well. But I can get you in with the psychologist like in a day or two. She goes, because you need to get in here. And it was just the best thing I ever did. It was a wonderful fit. The therapist was awesome. The doctor was awesome. And the secretary was awesome. And I owe them everything, you know.
That's amazing. I mean, it's amazing
definitely
that
hard
you
to do, though.
reached out. Yeah, that's why it's amazing, because I think that a lot of people suffer with it for a lot longer out of pride, or maybe they really don't know what's going on for a longer period of time. And, you know, I think that it sounds like to me that your anxiety attack was kind of like the icing on the cake after everything that you were already experiencing emotionally, which was out of the ordinary for you. And then that was kind of like the kicker, like, okay, you know, this has to, you know, stop. I have to feel better.
Yeah.
So
that was definitely the moment where everything sort of made sense. Like at that point, it's like, you know what? I'm looking back now at all these things, and they're all part of the big picture now. They're all not just individual nuances or just whatever. Like this is I'm having a problem.
Was there anybody that you reached out to during that year that you were going through those emotions and, you know, irrational feelings or being scared? I mean, was there anybody that you were able to talk to about that, or you just didn't because you didn't really know what you were going through?
Yeah, I really didn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't really, for a lot of that time, I don't think I was as aware as I am now what was happening.
Right.
So I think it took the hindsight of everything sort of making sense to be like, yeah, when I started to explain everything and, you know, this is what's really going on. It's like they're not isolated, you know, behavioral traits. They're all related to this one big overwhelming problem.
Right. Do you think that it's possible that a lot of these, like a lot of your colleagues, let's say, for example, people in law enforcement or EMS services, do they possibly deny the fact that this could happen to them because they really associate it with extreme situations like war, and they don't really think that PTSD can happen to them? So they're like in denial possibly, even when they start having the symptoms?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think because PTSD has been I think it was so well studied through veterans, you know, who were coming back from war and, you know, what they used to call shell shock back in the, you know, World War II time and stuff. So I think a lot of people always assume, well, this is a veteran-specific condition, but it's not just a veteran-specific. Yes, veterans are certainly exposed to what they're exposed to, but it's any type of trauma, you know, and
definitely.
And it's trauma which is above and beyond the normal.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I think I think there's the old, you know, police officers are very, very rigid in their thinking sometimes. They don't like change. So, you know, I'm sure that, you know, a generation ago, the police officers hated the thought of computers because they were used to typewriters.
Right.
Now to think
yeah.
that they ever did. Now I think, my God, how did they ever type reports? You know what I mean? But,
of course.
And the generation before that, they didn't have radios. They used to have telephone boxes throughout the downtown that had lights on them. And the officer would look for the light blinked and to know they had to pick the phone up to call headquarters. So I'm sure the first officers with radios probably hated them.
For sure.
So we don't like change. It's just it's a police officer trait. They don't like change. And so I think it's always been, well, it's part of the job, is what you signed up for, what you expect, and
right. Know. That's exactly what I was saying earlier, and that's my impression, but I'm not on the inside, so it's so great to talk to you because I feel like that's the impression that I would get, you know, or the general public would get, is that, well, they're used to it. It's like, no, they're not used to anything. They're still human beings, and human beings with families and loved ones. So seeing traumatic things, you can't help but, as a human being, to relate that to your own relationships with your loved ones. And
Right.
Add to that the risk of your life in a situation like the shootout that you were talking about. That's a whole other level. You know, I mean, you might as well be at war because you're at war with whoever it is that's shooting up the place. You know,
Right.
so it's the same thing.
It is, and fortunately, I think that generation of thought is now fading because that's the generation they're retired or about to retire. And it's the younger generation of officers coming up that are being taught it's okay. You know, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to talk about these things. You know,
That's
because you
amazing.
are going to see things which are not normal. And
Definitely.
yes, you signed up for it. And, you know, yes, and this is what I always explain at the academy. Yes, you did sign up for it. Yes, you're going to expect to see bad things. And yes, it's okay to feel these things, and it's okay to talk about them because it's still not normal. It's okay, even though you signed up for it. It's still not normal to see it.
Yeah, like, okay, you signed up for it, but you still might need support and guidance and, you know, education to navigate through it because it's not going to be easy. So
and it's okay to ask for help and talk to people.
That's amazing that that's becoming more, you know, the norm because it's just so unhealthy to expect a person who chose a career to dehumanize themselves or desensitize themselves. It's just, you know, it's not possible. So,
no.
I'm not saying that you guys don't grow a thick skin in certain circumstances, as I'm sure you do, which, you know, when you see the same thing every day, I'm sure that does happen. But, you know, when it comes to like addicts or addiction, I'm sure you guys see just so much of that. But, you know, when it comes to even that sometimes, it just takes one specific circumstance to emotionally trigger or traumatize a person, you know, no matter what position you're in. And add to that the violence and the things that ugly and dark things that certain human beings do to each other. I just can't imagine how hard that must be. So what exactly happened with that event, with the shootout? Because I don't think we got into too much detail. So are you allowed to talk about that actually?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's
okay.
That deal has been settled. So
okay. Yeah.
I don't know if it was really a shootout. It was so it was a call. It was the hospital in town has the mental health unit, and I was a detective working. There was 3 patrol officers and myself working a shift. I was a detective, and we were called up to the sergeant's desk because he had just received a phone call from a woman who said her father was off his meds. He had a history of mental illness. He was on his way to Bon Secours, and he went there to blow things up and kill people. He had his wife with him, we were told, and he had just gotten his guns back from the court over in Pennsylvania and was seen walking around in the morning with a .38 in his hand.
Oh, my God. Wow.
So that's what we're told. We're told, you know, he's going to the hospital to blow things up and kill people, and he's in a black Nissan Xterra. So we go up to the hospital to try to intercept him to, you know, 1, make sure he's not going up there to kill people, blow things up, and 2, to make sure he gets the help he needs. He's clearly in a crisis. Well, we do encounter him behind the hospital, and within 46 seconds of pulling him over, well, we didn't really pull him over as much as he came to a stop as we lit him up in the back parking lot with our police lights. And he, you know, he got out of the car. He was completely unresponsive to us. So he was yelling and screaming to his wife, who was in the car still. And me and another officer I got in a car, the patrol officer. We're trying to give him commands like, hey, let me see your hands. And I remember him having this big trench coat on, and he was constantly reaching inside of his coat, like he was pulling out something. And I remember every time thinking he's going to pull a gun out any second. And one of the things that happens in those encounters is you get, they call it visual acuity, meaning you see things in much greater detail than you normally would. So it's almost as if you're able to zoom in. It's kind of weird that it happens. But I remember at one point, and this all happened in 46 seconds, I was closer to the car, so as he's yelling and screaming, I remember running up alongside the Nissan, and as I'm running alongside of it, I was waiting any moment. I'm thinking he's going to see me and put a bullet through me. That's the moment I thought I was about to die. Like, he's going to see me, and he's going to shoot me. And I remember opening the car door and pulling his wife out and telling her to get away from here, because I didn't want her being a hostage. And I'm like, let's get her out of here. So another officer came running up and grabbed her. And the minute this gentleman realized his wife was no longer in the car, he pulls out a hand grenade and tells us that we're all going to die now. He says, now we're all going to die. And I remember him holding a hand grenade in his hand and pulling the pin. And I remember it's almost as if it's slow motion zoomed in, seeing his finger and his hand shaking as he was pulling on the pin of a grenade.
Wow.
Actually seeing that detail of his hand shaking as he was struggling to pull this pin. And then, we're telling him not to do it. And I remember hearing the other officer to my left. I remember his gun going off. And I never actually heard my gun going off. I heard his. I didn't hear mine. And that's where your body, the auditory exclusion, is able to block that out. Because normally, if you shoot a gun without hearing protection, your ears ring. It's horrible.
Wow, I bet, yeah.
But in this case, my ears, to this day, I can't explain. I just knew I was going to stop him, or at least I thought I was going to stop him. And then, of course, once he immediately dropped, and I remember yelling that grenade, run, and we just all turned around and ran. So I'm thinking, now we're going to blow up. And I remember we basically jumped behind a parked car and just sit there waiting for a moment. And then when nothing happened, thank God it had been rendered inert, because we probably would have been killed or seriously wounded from the shrapnel.
That is unreal.
So, just a horrible experience. And then, of course, we couldn't just sit there. We had to, this is the parking lot of the hospital. People are coming to visit. We had to, we're yelling to security to not let anybody into the parking lot, calling for backup. I mean, it was a horrible moment. You didn't have time to really digest it at that time.
I bet.
At what really happened. It's later on looking back. And that's what, in hindsight, the psychologist we saw was saying, you guys did a great job. Not only did you, take on what you perceived as an immediate threat, but afterwards you realized, hey, this could be a live grenade on the ground. You took the wherewithal to make sure to block off the parking lot, to tell security to get people back. Like, you didn't just sit there and stop doing your job. You continued to do what you needed to do. And he goes, and that's amazing. And that's great. It's good to know that, but how about everything else that I needed to know?
Wow, that is intense. I can't even imagine, honestly. So what kind of advice would you give to the younger generations that are now involved, in law enforcement or even emergency services of any type, or anybody who can witness and experience any type of traumatic events like this? What is the advice that you would give them, and what are the signs, especially the early signs, to look out for before it gets too crazy?
So my advice is always, number one, you're going to see stuff that most people will never see or understand, and that those are things that it's okay to react. It's okay to have that negative reaction to it later on. Do your job. But, you may go to a call where it may be something that's not even criminal. Maybe it's a SIDS death. It's a very common occurrence for police officers to experience.
Right.
That can bother you, and that's okay. It should bother you. It's okay to feel those emotions. And I think that's the most important part is letting the officers know, the young especially, it's okay to feel those things. It doesn't make you less of a man. It doesn't make you less of a cop. Feelings. It makes you human. If you didn't have those feelings, you'd be psychotic. You'd be antisocial or something. You should be in an institution.
Absolutely. You'd be a sociopath if you didn't. Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. Like, it's okay to feel those things. It's okay to go home and cry, or to go in a back room and cry. It's okay. It doesn't make you less of a man. That notion that, men can't cry, or, if it bothers you, you're in the wrong job. No. if it bothers you to the point where you can't do your job, maybe you're in the wrong job. But it's okay to feel what you're feeling. It's okay, after the fact, after you've done what you're required to do by what we're supposed to do in this circumstance, go home and feel that, or take that time, talk to somebody. And I think that's where the acceptance has gotten better. We have a department chaplain, and even though he's like the pastor of a church, when it comes to being our chaplain, he's very non-denominational. So
that's nice.
He sat down with officers. Back in the summer, we had a gentleman in town who had been intoxicated and laid down and passed out in front of the ambulance bay. And when the ambulance pulled out to go on a call, they didn't know he was there, and they ran him over and killed him.
Wow.
Horrible accident, tragic. He was killed instantly. They basically crushed his skull.
Oh, my God.
And I was working with my guys, and myself were working. And we called the chaplain to come down and break the news to his parents with us, which was very helpful. And then the chaplain talked to the officers, and he also talked to the ambulance crew that had been operating the ambulance. And I think that went a long way in helping everybody involved to see, to help them at least start putting things in perspective immediately. So there is no waiting. It's happening basically contemporary with the event.
Wow, that's unreal.
Yeah, but I think that helped. And these were all young officers. We're relatively new that were responding. And I remember I was on the desk, and it came in as a 911 call. Man hit by the ambulance and is apparently dead. And I'm like, I send my guys down there, and I'm like, someone notify me immediately if the person is dead. And they call up like, oh, no, he's dead. He's right outside the ambulance bay. And I'm like, holy crap, that doesn't happen. And these are young guys, they're young. They're relatively still inexperienced police officers in terms of seeing all of these terrible things. So the fact that the chaplain was there and was able to just kind of talk to them in general and give them simple advice, I think helped them a lot. And so I think not only it's okay to feel it, but I think having someone available to talk to immediately is good. Even if they're not a psychologist, if they're a chaplain, a spiritual advisor, someone wwho can things in perspective immediately.
Right, and
so that
non-judgmental.
They're not trying to do it on their own.
Right. Put it in perspective immediately. That's a great point, and you would know better because you're in that. But also just to not feel any judgment about, any spiritual leader or, chaplain. It doesn't matter what religion. I feel like, it's so important to have that type of support without judgment about emotions, because specifically, as we were saying, for men, they feel that they're going to be judged by their emotions, that they're not being man enough, or they're not being, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's still a really big problem in our society, but I do agree with you how it's fading away, You have a lot of sensitive guys out there now, and they're allowed to express it. But this is a whole other level, right? This is like serious trauma. This is serious, serious trauma, and it can go on for years if it's left untreated. It ruins lives if the person doesn't get help. So that's why I was like so excited to have you on today to talk about this, because you've been in it. I didn't know exactly for how long, but I knew it was quite a while that you were in law enforcement. And you've seen a lot, and just your specific experience with PTSD and not knowing that you actually had that for a year, and then finally realizing it with the culmination with the panic attack, right? Thank God.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people, their lives are ruined because they don't know that they have it, and they have irrational fears. I don't even know how irrational they are, actually. I'm not even going to say, because you know what I mean? Like, can you really call them irrational? Because look what they just saw. So it's not irrational. It's almost like the impact of here's what almost happened to me, and here's what could happen again. And so it's not a surprise to me that your subconscious is doing whatever it can to protect you, which is what I think is actually really going on there, right? With PTSD.
Yes.
I'm not a doctor, but I am I'm certified in hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming, and I deal with people who have traumas, but PTSD is such a severe form that it does require a doctor, right? A therapist. So
yes. And I remember when I first met with the psychologist, and then, whatever amount of time later with the psychiatrist, both of them were extremely impressed that I figured out I was having an anxiety attack and could calm myself through it. And I'm like, well, I knew I wasn't having a heart attack, so it had to be something else. And the only thing I could think of was anxiety attack. And they're like, a lot of people can't calm themselves through that first, terrible. I said, I had no other choice. I'm in the car. It was either pass out or sit in the car and breathe. And they're like, well, that's a good awareness. I'm like, well, like I said, I wasn't having a heart attack, so. But, and the other thing too is.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the other thing besides getting help is also people have to also, especially in EMS, police services, they have to also understand that it's okay sometimes to need medication, to not be closed off to the fact that you may need medication to get you through this also. And to not have that stigma that, oh my God, if I'm on a mental health med, that means I'm crazy.
No, I agree with you. It's usually temporary, and then they'll wean you off it as you start to do better. Is that correct in your case?
For a lot of people, yes. For some, no. But I think and whenever I deal with people in crisis, or if we've arrested people with mental illness, and sometimes they'll be off their med, and I always tell them, I'm like, listen, you have to remember, your brain is an organ. It's no different than any other part of your body. A diabetic's pancreas doesn't make insulin, so they have to take insulin. If they didn't take insulin, they'll die. I said, it's no different than your brain or your heart. If you were told if you don't take this pill every day, your heart's going to stop working, you take your pill. And usually they say yes. I'm like, well, it's no different than your brain. Your brain isn't working right. I said, so there's no shame in that. But there's been this stigma with mental health and mental illness, and I think it's getting better, but there's still that stigma. People think, well, if I have to take medicine, that makes me crazy. And that's not necessarily true. It's just sometimes that's what's required to sort of get the mind and the person back on the correct path they need to be.
Well, you're absolutely right with that, and it's all about rebalancing the chemical production in the brain and the balance of that, but also redirecting the neurotransmitters, because after a traumatic event, your neurotransmitters are redirected to a certain part of the brain that actually will make you relive the trauma. Anything that reminds you of it is going to make you emotionally relive it. And that's the thing. So medications are often used to balance things out, in addition and coupled with, I should say, with other types of therapies, which I think is amazing, because you want to do everything you can simultaneously, right, to balance everything back out. So I do understand exactly what you're saying, and I think it's a great message to share with everybody. Like, when you need to get yourself back on track, don't be ashamed of anything. You got to rebalance the chemicals. You got to redirect those neurotransmitters. You even have to rewire the brain. But the chemical reaction is just, also can need to be balanced with certain medications. So, yeah, that's amazing. That's a great message.
Yep. And sometimes it's just a matter of, if anxiety becomes the overpowering condition, you're never going to manage anything if you can't manage the anxiety. So if you can temporarily, say, manage the anxiety with medicine, then the person's able to better address all the other issues. They can exercise more. They can, overcome those fears. They can talk about it with a therapist and then wean them off of the medication, because you've sort of done that. It's like a stopping measure. We're going to arrest the problem as quickly as we can, and now we're going to work on bringing you away from that point so that we can get you off of those medicines because you won't need them.
Exactly. And that's what, from what I understand, is very commonly done. They use the medication up until a certain point, and then along with the other types of therapy that they're getting, talk therapy, whatever type of counseling, they start weaning them off during the counseling as they see the patient improving. So
Yes.
That's a great message to send out, because I think that a lot of the times it's the shame. It's the way we think about our problem that is the problem, not the fact that we necessarily have one, which obviously can be with PTSD, but you know what I mean? Like, it's the way that we think about the problem and the way we handle the shame of having a problem. It's a pride thing on many levels, I think, for some people, not for everybody. Although we have also, like we were discussing just earlier, there's a lot of people who don't know these signs and symptoms. So it's great that you're telling the audience right now, like, what those signs and symptoms are, what to look out for. Because if they don't know what that is, they're just going to think, well, maybe somebody's really after me, or,
Right.
Right.
And to also know that even though it's under control, and I think my life has improved dramatically since I reached out, things still change occasionally. A few years back, I started waking up in the middle of the night with these horrible, like I would just wake up in a like I couldn't breathe. I would wake up gasping, run to the window, and I would like open the window and stick my head out the window to breathe. And this would go on. It wouldn't happen every night, but my poor wife would be like, "You can breathe." And thank God she knew what was going on, and she would usually help me get back to sleep. But when I brought it up to my doctor, like, yeah, that can happen. You can develop something completely different, and it can happen. So like, it's okay.
Wow.
And so when you have somebody and you have that relationship with a professional who knows what they're doing and is competent, and you feel comfortable with, and when you explain that to them, and they're telling you, yep, that's perfectly normal, and it can happen. Even years later, you can develop this. And they're like, and they help you work through that, where I don't have that anymore. But, for a while, it was like a regular occurrence almost. And again, I knew I could breathe, but I felt like I couldn't breathe, which is just as bad. You're sticking your head out the window to breathe, like a dog out there having his head out the window of a car, So, and I still jump when I hear loud noises. My oldest two don't torment me with it anymore as much as they used to.
That's
and
good.
The youngest one hasn't figured out that Daddy jumps with loud noises, but when he does, I'm sure he'll torment me. But I just accept it. It's like, okay, it's just a part of life. Like I've become used to the fact that I'm hypersensitive to that. My startle response is exaggerated. So,
for a very good reason.
And I just deal with it.
Okay. But you've kind of taken that on as your new normal. You're like, okay, I know why this is happening. I know why my startle response is strong now, and I'm okay with that. It's for a reason.
Yes.
That's amazing.
And it's funny because like in the fall, I do horror makeup at a haunted house in the fall, and part of what we do is afterwards we walk through and check our makeups and the lighting of the haunted house. And of course, people are jumping out and stuff, and it's kind of like one of those.
Oh no!
Purposely putting myself into the most startling, but usually I know where everybody is, so I'm able to kind of like, okay, someone's going to jump out here. But again, just knowing that this is normal for me, and that okay, I expect this to happen. I expect if someone pops a balloon behind my back, I'm going to jump, and it's
right.
It is what it is. It's okay. It's just part of my new normal.
So, what would you say was the biggest improvement after therapy? Like, was that more so the, being home alone at night and looking under your cabinets, or what, that type of severity? Was that the stuff that lifted?
Yeah, a lot of those, a lot of the irrational issues sort of went away pretty quickly. It took a while for the intrusive thoughts, the reoccurring dreams, the avoiding the location of the shooting.
Mm-hmm.
I used to get a very negative reaction whenever I would see a black Nissan Xterra. And I don't get that negative reaction anymore, but I can still spot them a mile away. Like, It's amazing how I just have that awareness for, my mind has become trained now. I can spot a black Nissan Xterra, and it's just, it just happens. So, but That's okay. I'm okay with that. That's just, again, that's part of what I accept as normal now. Like, okay, I'm just going to know that I'm going to see them. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't have any negative connotation. It just means, hey, I'm just more aware of black Nissan Xterra than anybody else is, I guess, right now. And, and I think accepting it as part of, listen, I'm not perfect. I'm a flawed human like everybody else is. And, I'm going to have these little weird, idiosyncrasies in my life now. I'm, loud noises and startling. And, that for me is just sort of okay. It doesn't make me less of a man. It doesn't make me less of a cop. It doesn't make me weak. It just is. It's just the new norm, and we change. I think we're going to change with age anyway as we grow older.
Absolutely.
And it's also given me an appreciation of working with crime victims, because crime victims go through very similar experiences. For example, rape victims go through a very similar experience. I think they call it rape trauma syndrome, but it's very similar to PTSD.
Okay.
Crime victims, they go through very similar symptoms. So there's been cases where people have been robbed at gunpoint with a gun stuck in their face. And when the police officers, interview them and ask what the person looked like, they say, I don't know. But then they'll describe every detail on the gun, like a nick in the barrel, a marking. People have memorized serial numbers off of the gun, but can't tell the officer what the gunman looked like.
Wow.
And, I learned through my own journey that that's normal, because the person's face isn't what's going to kill you, it's the gun. And, my own experience that night behind the hospital, I couldn't tell you what the guy looked like, but I could describe the hand grenade in detail.
Wow. And his hand shaking,
everything,
right?
So, yep. So it made sense to me, like, what, so it was a newfound appreciation. So when victims, explain things, a lot of times you have to look at it, they're coming from a traumatic experience. They're responding very similarly to how I responded to mine and how millions of other people respond to their traumas. So it was a newfound, it changed how I approached working with victims. And I think it made me a better cop in that respect, a better detective, that's for sure.
I was just going to say that, because you can actually empathize with the person instead of getting frustrated with them. Like, how come you can't remember? I'm sure it's frustrating for cops sometimes. But after you've been on the other side of that and you've been the victim as well, or victimized, let's say, or almost victimized, and you've been fearful for your life, you've been in danger, you can actually empathize with the victim instead of getting frustrated. Like, how come you can't remember? Well, I already get it, so just try your best.
Yeah, and also how you, and just how you talk to them, and how you, the manner of your voice, the tone, the speed of your speech, just your mannerisms, learning how to talk to people and make them feel comfortable, especially female victims of rape.
Okay. Yeah, I can just imagine. Explain that.
We've had a few. So what was that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I would love to hear more about that, actually. How do you approach them, and how do you know what startles them? Like, what have you seen?
So we've had really two I want to say in my detective career, just a few real forcible rapes where it's a stranger type of rape. They tend to be very uncommon. Fortunately,
okay.
you know, the stranger grabbing somebody and raping them. More often than not, it's an acquaintance or someone that they know. Not that it makes it better, but it's
of course.
a little
but I know what you're saying.
Right. There's just some. To me, the scariest thought is, you know, someone out there lurking and stalking women and targeting them at random.
Oh my God.
Because they're much harder to find.
Yeah.
But with DNA today makes it a lot easier to some extent, but still, you know, you have to have. It's still terrifying. So, but just understanding that, you know, you have to get your information. You know, there's information that we need to proceed as a investigation that you need from the victim, and learning how to every victim's different, but how to talk to that person, preserving their dignity, and making them know it's okay. And again, it's okay to feel what you're feeling. So if they're crying, it's okay to let them cry. And you know, I've had them in my office, and I used to keep the box of tissues, and I would sit next to them, and I'd hold the box of tissues for them. And I'd let them cry, not push them like, hey, listen, I really need this information. Can you cry later? Like, nope, it's okay. Take your time. And if you need to cry, you need to cry. If they're not crying. Yeah, and some people don't cry. You know, there's no such thing as a normal reaction to rape, which is a big myth. You know, people always say, well, she's not upset. She must be lying. Well, no.
She's in shock.
Right. Like, there's no such thing as a normal reaction to rape. Again, it's very similar to PTSD. It's a traumatic experience. Everybody reacts differently.
Right. And would you say that a lot of that reaction is a fight or flight even after the fact? Some people are like ignoring that until it just consumes them. And then, you know what I mean? Like, there's that fight or flight, I think. And that's the same thing when people go into shock. Some people react like they fall apart right away, and some people are in shock to the point where they're numb to it for a while.
Yeah, I think that does happen, definitely. Mm-hmm. It's the mind is trying to protect them. Mm-hmm. You know, like shutting down, almost like temporarily, like, I'm going to suspend your emotions for a little while here because I don't know what just happened, but it was bad, and I'm not going to let you feel this right now.
Yeah.
So I think it's a protective mechanism. And again, everybody's different.
Right.
But, you know, just knowing how to be non-threatening, you know, how to talk to them, how to ask the questions without being judgmental, you know, without and empathizing with them and allowing them to experience what they're experiencing and letting them know it's okay to feel that way, you know, and letting them know this isn't their fault, nothing they did, because they're always that level where someone's trying to say, well, if I had just done this, and it's, no, you didn't do anything wrong. It's the other person shouldn't have done what they did, period. You know, you have no culpability in this, and letting them know that this is not their fault. None of it's their fault. It's the person who perpetrated the crime's fault. And I think that goes a long way.
I was just going to say that. I feel like that's one of the most important things a victim can feel, hear and feel right off the bat, because people internalize things, and we always seem to think, I must have done something to deserve it, or it was my fault. You know, most of us do internalize things. So I think that's amazing to have that type of empathy and know what a person needs in that situation. And, you know, it's terrible, the stuff that you've gone through, but it has made you more empathetic and a little more insightful into the emotional needs of a victim, because you've been there yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I remember one of the real stranger rapes, I'd say stranger rapes, but forcible rapes, the man took it to trial, and the victim testified in the morning, and then they broke for lunch, and in the afternoon the victim was going to go on the stand to be cross-examined. And, she was extremely nervous. That's probably the worst, you know, victims. The thought of a victim being on the stand being re-victimized by the defense attorney is terrible. And I remember she's in the hallway. They have, you know, rape crisis advocates with her. And before she went in, I went up to her and said, listen to me. Remember one thing. I believe you. Everybody in this hallway, meaning the people that were surrounding her, believe you. And that jury is going to believe you. And she just smiled and said, thank you. And I remember when she went inside, the advocate said, that's one of the nicest things I've ever heard a police officer say to a victim before they went in to testify.
Oh, that's amazing.
I said, but it's the truth. And I wanted her to know that everybody here that matters are the ones that believe her. It doesn't matter what that defense attorney says. It matters what we all believe.
Right.
So, and he got convicted and got 18 years in prison.
Wow. Good. So,
yep.
And you gave her the confidence, and then, he got what he
deserved. And I think it was a team
deserved.
effort. I think it was everybody behind her knowing that she could go in there, be cross-examined, and still be okay. That, almost like we were all in there with her, even though we weren't and couldn't be.
That's amazing.
So,
no, that's
and to me,
incredible.
that's important.
Would you say that there's a big difference between the way you started out in your career and the way that you dealt with victims? And, obviously, is there just a massive difference with the way that you handle them now? Is it like night and day after what you've been through?
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome.
But I've also, when I started out, I was older when I became a police officer, but I grew up a pretty sheltered life. I didn't see a lot of violence and crime growing up at all. So,
right.
It's a little bit of a culture shock when you first become a police officer, having grown up in a small city and not really seen much. So it's like, being a little older.
Yeah. But you know what? We all evolve, and, you were thrown into that, and you did you handled things the best that you could, and then you've come out on top. You've dealt with your traumas. Luckily, it didn't go on for years. You had a year of something pretty severe. You dealt with it, and now you are probably one of the most supportive cops that, a victim could possibly be lucky enough to deal with. As not lucky because they're a victim to a crime, but just having that empathy, because it doesn't always happen that way.
Unfortunately,
Right. I mean, sometimes detectives can get pretty irritable or angry when they want information. It happens. They get frustrated. That's the word. Frustrated is better than saying they don't get angry, but they do get frustrated when they're trying to get to the bottom of something. And then there's a victim who's like falling apart after something traumatic. So, I think that's amazing.
I want to add one thing that, real quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
probably
please
the best thing that probably happened to policing, and people always bash the millennial generation, and I'm sure there's some things that are very legitimately to bash, but one of the things with the new generation is that they're much more in tune with their emotions, expressing their emotions, and being okay with that. So this new generation of police officers are coming from that generation where emotions are a little bit more accepted than they were, say, for you or I growing up.
That's amazing.
So, sometimes they come on a little entitled. Oh, why can't I be promoted to detective tomorrow? But overall, they're bringing also positive assets. So as much as people like to make the negatives out, there is a positive. And I think that's important. They're more willing to talk to their peers about their feelings, and they're much more accepting of those feelings, 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 accepting